I was 34 when that dinner happened, old enough to know better than to expect my family to act decent, but still naive enough to hope they would. My name's Rick, and my grandmother, Eleanor, had just turned 82. She's the kind of woman who still insists on ironing her bed sheets and baking pies for the neighbors, even when her knees ache and the oven door feels like it weighs 100 pounds. She practically raised me when my parents were too busy working or fighting, and if anyone deserved a proper celebration, it was her. So when I heard she wanted just a nice dinner with everyone together, I decided to make it happen. I run a small but successful marketing firm, nothing crazy, but big enough that I could pull some strings. I booked out a quiet Italian restaurant in town, the same one Grandma and I used to go to when I was a kid. She loved their lasagna so much she'd always sneak a little into a napkin for later. I told the manager I wanted everything perfect: soft jazz, floral centerpieces, the good wine, and her favorite dessert on the house. It wasn't cheap, but it felt right. I sent out invites to the whole family 2 weeks in advance. My cousins, aunts, uncles, even the ones who only ever called when they needed money. Everyone said they'd be there. I should have known better. The night of the dinner, Grandma showed up 20 minutes early, dressed in a powder blue sweater and pearls. She clutched my arm as we walked in and whispered, "You didn't have to do all this, honey." But I wanted to. For once, I wanted her to feel like the center of everything, not an afterthought between someone's work trip or kid's soccer game. We sat, ordered drinks, and waited. The table was set for 12. At 6 o'clock, it was just us. At 6:15, still empty. By 6:30, Grandma gave a little chuckle and said, "They must be caught in traffic." I smiled, pretending to check my phone, but I already knew. The group chat was silent. At 7 o'clock sharp, 2 hours late, the doors swung open. In came my Uncle Martin, loud as ever, followed by his wife, Sharon, and their 2 adult kids, Mason and Kylie. All 4 of them were glued to their phones, wearing the kind of smug exhaustion that comes from doing absolutely nothing important. Martin clapped his hands like a game show host. "We're here. Hope you didn't start without us." Grandma stood up, smiling wide. "Oh, I'm just so glad you made it." I wanted to say, "Glad you made it?" We've been sitting here for 2 hours. But Grandma was already hugging them, and I didn't want to sour her mood. Martin slid into the chair at the head of the table, the one I'd set for Grandma, and said, "Man, we had a nightmare finding parking. Rick, you should have picked somewhere with a valet." "It has valet," I said. "Oh, well, no one told us," Sharon added, as if that justified it. Kylie, 22 and permanently scowling, groaned, "What's the Wi-Fi here? I'm dying without signal." Grandma tried to joke, "We used to survive just fine without the internet, dear." Kylie snorted, "Yeah, back when dinosaurs roamed." The table went quiet. Grandma blinked like she hadn't quite heard, then smiled faintly. "Well, I suppose that makes me one of them." Sharon laughed. "Oh, Mom, don't be dramatic. You're just old-fashioned." I clenched my jaw. I told myself before dinner, no arguments. Keep it peaceful. But every word out of their mouths chipped at that promise. We ordered. Or rather, I ordered. Martin waved a hand. "Get us some wine, Rick. The good stuff. You're the one paying, right?" "Technically, yes, but the way he said it made it sound like charity." I nodded stiffly, trying to keep my cool. The waiter brought bread, and Grandma tore a piece in half, buttering it delicately. "This reminds me of your grandfather," she said. "He used to." "Speaking of Grandpa," Martin interrupted, "I found some of his old coins last week. You know, those silver ones from the war? Might be worth something. I'll probably sell them. No sense keeping junk around." I saw Grandma's hand pause midair. "Those were his keepsakes," she whispered. "Yeah, well," Sharon said, sipping her wine, "memories don't pay bills." That was the first time I thought about ending the dinner early. But Grandma gave me that small smile again, the one that said, "Don't cause trouble." So I stayed quiet. The evening dragged. Every time Grandma tried to reminisce, someone interrupted. Mason bragged about his crypto investments. Sharon complained about her new car not being luxury enough. And Martin kept making backhanded comments about how nice it must be to afford things like this restaurant. At one point, Martin leaned over to me and said in a low voice, "So, Rick, rumor is you're doing well for yourself. Marketing or something." "Yeah," I said. "We've grown a lot this year." He smirked. "Well, good for you. Maybe next time you can get Grandma something nicer than dinner." It was meant as a joke, but it landed like a punch. Grandma tried to change the subject again. Bless her, by talking about her garden. Kylie rolled her eyes. Can we please not talk about dirt? This is so boring. I caught Grandma's smile falter for the first time that night. By dessert, I wasn't even tasting the food. I just kept watching Grandma's face, the way she forced small talk, laughed when no one listened, and dabbed her napkin every time her eyes welled up. Then came the breaking point. As the waiter cleared plates, Grandma stood and lifted her glass. I just wanted to say thank you all for coming. I know everyone's busy, but it means so much to me to have us together. Family is everything, after all. Martin chuckled. Well, some of us showed up. Sharon nodded. Yeah, we would have been on time if Rick had picked somewhere decent. Kylie whispered something to Mason, and they both laughed. Grandma blinked again, unsure what was funny. I opened my mouth, ready to say something, anything, but Martin cut in once more, turning to the waiter. Hey, buddy, we'll need the Wi-Fi code. Gotta check something real quick. The waiter looked hesitant. I'm sorry, sir, but it's not a public network. Martin scoffed. Not public? What kind of place doesn't have Wi-Fi in 2025? Kylie leaned back in her chair. Seriously, this place is so outdated. No wonder Grandma likes it. That did it. Grandma froze, her hand still gripping her wine glass. Outdated? She repeated softly. Martin laughed. She's just joking, Ma. You know how she is. Kids don't mean anything by it. Grandma sat down slowly, staring at her napkin. Something in me snapped. I didn't show it. Not yet, but a quiet, steady anger started building. For years, I'd watched them treat her like she was just in the way. But tonight, on her birthday of all nights, they were mocking her to her face. I leaned over and said gently, You okay, Grandma? She smiled that tired smile again. Oh, I'm fine, dear. They don't mean it. But I knew better. The waiter came by with the bill, and Martin waved it off. Just give it to Rick. He's the big shot here. I smiled, calm as ever. Oh, don't worry, I said. It's already taken care of. And it was just not in the way they thought. Because they didn't know one very important thing. I hadn't just booked the restaurant. I owned it. And in that moment, as Grandma quietly folded her napkin and my uncle boasted about selling junk coins, I realized I wasn't done staying silent. Not this time. That was the moment the plan started forming, quietly, almost naturally. And by the time the adjusted tab arrived, they'd learn exactly what family dinner meant to me. The next morning, Grandma called to thank me again for the dinner. Her voice was soft, but full of that old warmth that made you want to be better, to do better. She said, It was such a lovely evening, dear. Don't worry about the little things. Family's just family. I wanted to tell her it wasn't little, that the way they talked down to her, treated her like a burden, wasn't normal. But she'd always believed that family came first, no matter what. It's what made her kind, and what they'd spent decades taking advantage of. I didn't say any of that. I just told her I loved her and that I'd stop by later in the week. But inside, something heavy had shifted, the kind of anger that didn't flare up and fade, but simmered like coals waiting for air. A few days later, I stopped by her house to drop off a bouquet. The same car from the restaurant, Martin's silver SUV, was in the driveway. I could hear laughter from inside, but not the kind that warms a room. The brittle kind, full of mockery and half-whispered judgment. I knocked and stepped in. Grandma was in her recliner, smiling weakly. Martin and Sharon were at the dining table, sorting through papers. Mason was scrolling on his phone, and Kylie was taking selfies near the window. Rick, Grandma said brightly, you just missed lunch. Martin and Sharon brought takeout. Yeah, Martin said, glancing up. We figured we'd help her clean up some of these old bills and letters. You wouldn't believe how much useless junk she's been keeping. Junk, I echoed, stepping closer. He held up a stack of yellowed envelopes. Old letters from Grandpa. Expired warranties. Tax receipts from the 90s. She doesn't need this clutter. I told her we'd handle it. I looked at Grandma. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I like keeping them, she said softly. They remind me of. She's got memory boxes in every room, Sharon cut in. Honestly, it's kind of hoarding. We're just trying to help. I could feel my hands tighten around the bouquet. You mean you're deciding what she gets to keep? Sharon gave me a patient smile, the kind people use when they think they're smarter than you. Rick, she's 82. She doesn't need stacks of paper. We're simplifying. I glanced at the papers again, and that's when I noticed the folder at the bottom of the pile. It wasn't yellowed or old. It was crisp, clean, and labeled property docs. Wait, I said slowly. What are you doing with those? Martin shrugged. Just sorting. She asked me to take a look at her house insurance. Right, Ma? Grandma hesitated. Well, you said you'd help me with that renewal thing. Exactly, Martin said. She trusts me. I didn't believe that for a second. Martin had a way of convincing people that his ideas were theirs. I'd seen him do it to Grandma for years. The car loan that was never repaid. The temporary use of her basement that became permanent storage. He saw the look on my face and added, Relax, Rick. Not everything's a conspiracy. We're family, remember? I forced a smile, but my chest was tight. I wanted to say, that's exactly the problem. That evening, I couldn't shake it off. I kept replaying the image of Grandma's papers spread across the table, her gentle hands hovering just above them like she didn't know whether she still owned what was hers. A week later, it got worse. Grandma called me in the afternoon, sounding confused. Sweetheart, did you sign me up for some kind of new internet thing? A package came with your name on it, but Martin said it was part of my house upgrade. I froze. What package? It's just a router box and some paperwork. Martin said it's for the smart home system he's installing so I don't fall or something. I clenched my jaw. Martin couldn't set up a printer, let alone a smart home. I'll stop by, I said, already grabbing my keys. When I arrived, Grandma was sitting on the porch, holding a glossy brochure with the words Elder Life Security Solutions. It was a service my company had worked with before, expensive and unnecessary for her house. Inside, new gadgets were half installed, motion sensors, smart bulbs, and even a tablet mounted to the wall. Martin stood in the living room, barking orders at Mason. Hey, I called. What is this? Martin turned, annoyed. Oh, hey, we're upgrading Mom's place. She's been forgetting stuff lately. Leaving the stove on, not locking the door. That's not true, Grandma said gently. I only left the stove once, and that was last Christmas. Yeah, well, Martin said, better safe than sorry. Besides, it's all under her name, so no worries. Under her name? I repeated. Yeah, he said casually. We signed her up. Monthly payments. Affordable rate. She's got plenty from Grandpa's pension anyway. Grandma frowned. I thought you said this was free? Martin chuckled. Technically free, Ma. You just pay the maintenance. I stepped closer. How much a month? About 300. It's fine. It's for her safety. I stared at him. 300? That's highway robbery. She doesn't need this. He shrugged. You're not the only one allowed to help her, Rick. That hit harder than I expected. Because that's what this was about. Not Grandma's safety, not family. It was about control. Martin hated that I'd done something nice for her, something he hadn't orchestrated. And now, he was clawing back his territory, one manipulative act at a time. I tried reasoning with Grandma, but she looked torn. He's just trying to help, dear, she said. He worries about me living alone. I swallowed hard. He worries about your money, Grandma. That night, I went home and checked my old email threads. Sure enough, the Elder Life company had been flagged a few years ago for predatory contracts with elderly clients. I sent Grandma's info to a friend at the Consumer Protection Agency, just in case. But that wasn't the end of it. The following weekend, the family group chat lit up. Sharon had posted a message. Sharon, hey everyone. Reminder that Grandma's 82nd party gift fund is still open. Let's all pitch in for her renovation fund. Martin and I are organizing it. 2 hearts. There were already 5 replies from distant cousins sending money. I texted Sharon privately. Me, what renovation fund? Sharon, the one for Grandma's house. We're updating her kitchen and security. You were at the dinner, right? We talked about it. Me, no, you didn't. Sharon, well, you were busy playing waiter. Anyway, she's thrilled. We already spent most of it. Most of it. The next day, I drove straight to Grandma's again. She was in her garden, humming softly, trimming her roses. Grandma, I said gently, did you ask Martin to collect money for renovations? She blinked. Renovations? No, dear. Why would I? I showed her the chat. Her face fell. Oh, I didn't know about that. Did they at least renovate anything? I asked. She looked around. Well, Martin said he'd get me a new stove. But that was weeks ago. That was it. I'd had enough. I went home and called Martin. He didn't even sound nervous. Relax, Rick. We're handling it. Grandma's fine. Where's the money? I asked. Wow, suspicious much? It's in an account for the project. You want a receipt or something? Yes. He laughed. You don't trust your own uncle? Family's supposed to stick together. There it was, the line he always used when he was caught. Family, the word he'd twisted into a guilt trap. Later that week, I found out through a friend at the bank that Martin had indeed opened an account, not for Grandma, but in his and Sharon's names. The deposits matched the fund posts. Still, I didn't go nuclear yet. I wanted to see how far they'd go. A few nights later, Grandma called me, her voice trembling. Rick, did you cancel my cable? What? No. Martin said you did. He said you wanted me to cut expenses. I sat there in silence, jaw tight. Grandma, listen to me. I didn't cancel anything. He's lying. She sighed. I thought so. He's just been so different lately. He and Sharon keep saying I should let them handle things because I'm too old for paperwork. I don't want to cause a fuss, dear, but I feel like they don't see me anymore. That broke something in me. Because it wasn't just about the dinner anymore. It wasn't about Wi-Fi or lateness or snide comments. They were erasing her, piece by piece, under the disguise of helping. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the restaurant's financials. My business had grown enough that money wasn't a problem. But respect, that was priceless. If Martin wanted to keep calling himself family while exploiting the woman who raised us, fine. He'd get a lesson in what family loyalty really costs. And that's when the plan started forming for real, not out of anger this time, but out of precision. I knew their patterns: show up late, act entitled, mock others, and assume everyone else will pick up the bill. They'd been doing it at every family gathering for years. Only this time, I'd make sure the bill taught them something they wouldn't forget. I smiled at the thought, slow, deliberate, patient. The next family dinner was coming up. Grandma's rescheduled celebration, this time with everyone invited. And when that night came, Martin and his crew wouldn't be 2 hours late. They'd be right on time, to their own downfall. Grandma's rescheduled birthday dinner was set for the following Saturday, her idea this time. She said she wanted to give everyone another chance to make things right, though I could tell she was really just hoping for peace. That's how she'd always been, the peacemaker, the bridge, even when everyone else was busy burning it down. I tried to convince her to let me handle the arrangements quietly, maybe keep it small, just close family. But she insisted. We'll do it properly this time, she said, voice trembling with that hopeful tone that always made me cave. Maybe it'll bring everyone closer. If only she knew what was coming. By midweek, the group chat was buzzing again, not with apologies or excitement, but with complaints. Sharon, do we really have to go back to that same restaurant? The lighting was so harsh. Kylie, can we not? That place didn't even have Wi-Fi. Martin, Rick, I assume you'll cover dinner again? Grandma shouldn't have to pay. That last line set my jaw tight. I typed and deleted 3 different replies before settling on. Me, don't worry. Everything's taken care of. Which was true, just not in the way they imagined. I'd already spoken with the restaurant manager, who also happened to be my business partner, Kevin. We'd grown up together, and he'd seen enough of my family's antics over the years to know exactly what I meant when I said, make the experience memorable. By Friday night, everything was set. The restaurant was privately booked again under my company name, just like before, but this time I'd made some quiet adjustments: reserved menu, selective billing, and a few strategically timed announcements that would come later in the evening. But before any of that could happen, something else unfolded, something that changed the tone completely. Saturday morning, I stopped by Grandma's house to pick her up. The door was slightly open, and her voice, small, strained, carried from inside. Martin, please. I just don't think this is a good idea. I froze at the doorway. His voice followed, sharp and impatient. Mom, it's just paperwork. It'll make things easier for everyone. You keep saying you don't want to deal with bills or maintenance, right? I said I don't want to lose my home, she replied. My stomach dropped. I stepped inside quietly, the creak of the old wooden floor betraying me. Both of them turned. Martin's face twisted in irritation. Do you ever knock? What's going on? I asked, my tone calm but firm. Nothing, he said quickly, blocking my view of the table. Family business. I looked past him, saw a stack of documents and a pen in Grandma's trembling hand. The top page was a transfer of property form. I stared at him. You've got to be kidding me. Martin groaned. Oh, don't start. She asked me to help her handle her estate. I'm just getting ahead of the legal mess. Grandma looked up at me, eyes glistening. He said it's just in case something happens to me. That's not how it works, I said, stepping closer. Martin, you're trying to get her to sign her house over to you, aren't you? He scoffed. Wow, paranoid much. You really think I'd take advantage of my own mother? Yes, I said flatly. For a second, the mask slipped, just long enough for me to see the flash of guilt behind his eyes. But then he smiled, all faux charm again. You've always had this hero complex, Rick. You think everyone's out to get you. Relax. I'm just being proactive. I reached for the paper, but he moved faster, scooping the stack into a folder. Not your business, he snapped. It is when you're manipulating Grandma. He laughed coldly. Manipulating? Please. I'm the only one who actually shows up for her. That one stung, because for years, that had been his narrative. He'd swoop in with grand gestures when it suited him, while I was the one showing up quietly. The doctor appointments, the grocery runs, the late-night calls when she was lonely. But none of that ever counted with him. Rick, Grandma whispered, her voice barely audible. Maybe we can talk about this later. I took a deep breath and forced myself to step back. If I kept pushing now, he'd just make her feel worse, like she was the cause of the conflict. That was his favorite trick. Fine, I said, holding his gaze. We'll talk later. Sure, he said with a smirk. After dinner, maybe. Oh wait, you're paying again, right? I didn't answer, but in my head, the plan shifted from make them uncomfortable to make them exposed. Later that evening, I arrived at the restaurant early with Grandma. She looked nervous but hopeful, like she always did before family gatherings. Maybe tonight will be different, she said quietly as we stepped inside. I smiled faintly. It will be. By 7, the others began trickling in. Sharon arrived first, wearing a sequin dress like she was attending a gala. You booked the place again, she said, scanning the room. Must be nice having money to throw around. Martin followed behind her, loud and self-assured as always. Mason and Kylie trailed in, both glued to their phones. Look at you, Mr. Big Shot, Martin said, clapping me on the shoulder. You're practically running this place now, huh? Something like that, I replied. Dinner started off civil enough. I'd arranged for a fixed menu, lasagna, steak, or salmon, with a curated wine list. But within 20 minutes, the cracks showed. Martin complained about the portions. Sharon flagged the waiter 3 times to adjust her drink. Kylie rolled her eyes at everything Grandma said, and Mason kept snapping photos for his social media captioned #FamilyDinnerVibes, though none of us were smiling. Then, midway through the meal, the betrayal hit full force. Kevin approached the table with a polite smile. Excuse me, Mrs. Johnson, he said to Grandma. We just need your signature for the catering authorization tomorrow. It's the same as last time. Before Grandma could respond, Martin jumped in. Oh, I'll sign. I handle her stuff. Kevin looked confused. Actually, I believe the account's under her name. Yeah, Martin said, snatching the paper from his hands and scribbling his signature. She's not great with details. Grandma frowned. I can still sign my own name, Martin. He chuckled. It's fine, Ma. You don't need to strain yourself. Kevin glanced at me, unsure, but I gave him a slight nod. It was exactly what I expected and exactly what I needed to confirm. As Kevin walked away, I turned to Martin. You know, for someone who claims to help, you sure like taking control of things that aren't yours. He smirked. What can I say? Some of us are natural leaders. More like parasites, I muttered under my breath. He leaned in. You think you're better than us because you got lucky in business? Newsflash, Rick, you're just the family ATM. That's all you've ever been. The words hit harder than I wanted them to. Because deep down, I knew there was some truth to it. Not in what he said, but in how they saw me. To them, I was just the convenient relative with money, not the one who'd worked 16-hour days to get there. Grandma tried to defuse it, her voice soft. Boys, please, not tonight. Sharon chimed in. Martin's right, though. You do act like you're above everyone. Throwing these dinners, booking restaurants, making the rest of us feel small. You could have just hosted at home. I stared at her. You mean at your house that you said was too good for casual gatherings last Christmas? She huffed. That's different. The air at the table thickened, that sharp tension that precedes something breaking. And it broke faster than I thought. Martin leaned back and said, You know what, Ma? Maybe we should start moving forward with that power of attorney paperwork. You're not getting any younger, and someone responsible should manage things. Rick's too busy pretending to be a big shot. Grandma's fork clattered against her plate. Power of attorney, she repeated softly. Just a precaution, Martin said smoothly. We don't want any confusion later. Sharon and I already spoke with the notary. I froze. You what? He shrugged. Relax. She hasn't signed yet. But she will. It's in everyone's best interest. Grandma's lips trembled. You went behind my back? Mom, Sharon said quickly, don't make this about emotions. You said you were tired of managing bills. We're just making it easier. Grandma's hands began to shake. I didn't. Hey, I said sharply, cutting in. You two are unbelievable. She's right here. You're talking about taking her independence while she's sitting 3 feet away. Martin glared. Don't lecture me about family responsibility. You throw money around to make yourself feel good. That's not the same as being there. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. You want to talk about responsibility? You're bleeding her dry under the pretense of helping. That's not family, that's theft. Martin rose too, his voice rising with him. You think you're the hero in this story, Rick? You're not. You're just another selfish kid trying to buy redemption. The restaurant went quiet. Every eye turned toward us. Grandma, tears forming, whispered, please, stop. But Martin wasn't done. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket and slapped it onto the table. Fine. You want transparency? Here. We already got the paperwork notarized. All that's left is Mom's signature. Then you can stop interfering. I looked at the document. The same property transfer form from earlier, now with legal stamps. He'd gone ahead and processed it. All he needed was one shaky signature. Grandma stared at it like she was looking at a stranger's betrayal. You promised this was just a formality. Martin didn't even flinch. It is. You'll still live here. It'll just be under my name for protection. The words hung in the air, protection. The oldest lie in the book. And that was the moment I saw it break her. The way she sank back in her chair, shoulders slumped, that fragile spark of trust flickering out. She looked at me, not as the successful grandson, not as the fixer, but as the last person she could count on. That was the moment everything changed. Because I realized something. I couldn't just embarrass them. I had to dismantle everything they'd built on her back, publicly, permanently, and without them ever seeing it coming. So I sat down, calm again, and simply said, enjoy dinner. They thought it was over, but it was only just beginning. After that night, everything felt heavier, not just the air between us, but the silence that followed. For the first time in my life, Grandma didn't call the next morning. She always did after family dinners, even the awkward ones. This time, nothing. No gentle voicemail. No thank you, dear. Just quiet. By the third day, I drove to her house. The blinds were drawn, the curtains closed. When I knocked, she took longer than usual to answer. She looked smaller somehow, wrapped in her old cardigan even though it wasn't cold. Oh, Rick, she said softly. I was just having some tea. Her voice was frail, not like the strong, witty woman who raised me, but like someone worn thin by disappointment. Inside, the dining table was spotless. The framed family photo, the one from 10 years ago where everyone was smiling, was gone. I noticed it right away. Where's the picture? I asked. She hesitated. I put it away. Didn't feel right looking at it. That hit harder than I expected. We sat down, and she poured me some tea. It was lukewarm and slightly bitter, like she'd forgotten how long it had been steeping. I don't know what to do anymore, she said finally. Martin's been calling every day. He says I'm being ungrateful, that he's only trying to help. I clenched my jaw. He's trying to take control. She shook her head slowly. He said you're trying to turn me against him. Grandma, I don't want to fight with my sons, she said, her eyes glistening. I just wanted everyone to be together. The word sons hung in the air. It stung, not because she didn't mean it, but because it reminded me that to her, we'd always be equals, no matter what Martin did. I stayed with her most of that afternoon. We didn't talk much after that. She seemed lost in thought, staring out the window at her garden, the roses wilting from neglect. Before I left, she took my hand. Promise me, Rick, you'll try to make peace. Please. I don't want to leave this world with my family in pieces. I nodded, but I didn't promise. Because deep down, I already knew there wouldn't be peace. Not with people like Martin and Sharon. The next week was a blur. My business was still running fine, but I couldn't focus. My employees noticed I was distant. I'd open a spreadsheet and forget what I was looking for. The restaurant staff, my staff, even asked if I was okay. Just tired, I told them. But it was more than that. Then one evening, I got a text from Grandma. Grandma, he brought someone from the bank today. Said I needed to sign for something small. I didn't. But he's angry. I drove there that night. The porch light was off, but Martin's car was still out front. Through the window, I saw shadows, his pacing, hers sitting. I pushed open the door without knocking. What's going on? Martin looked up, startled. You again? Don't you ever mind your own business? Not when you're preying on Grandma. I snapped. He stepped forward. You think you're so righteous, don't you? You're not saving her. You're just feeding your ego. Grandma flinched at his tone. Martin, please. But he wasn't backing down. You know what, Rick? Maybe it's time you let the adults handle this. You play with your fancy restaurant and pretend you're some big shot CEO, but you're still just the same broke kid who needed Grandma to bail you out when you flunked college. That one stung. Hard. It had been years since anyone mentioned that. My first year of college, when I'd failed a class and nearly lost my scholarship. Grandma had quietly helped me pay for summer courses to make up for it. I'd promised her I'd never waste her kindness again. Martin knew exactly where to aim. Get out, I said quietly. He laughed. Oh, I'm not leaving. This is my mother's house. You don't get to tell me what to do. She doesn't want you here, I said, looking at Grandma. She looked torn. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Martin turned to her, his voice dropping to that oily tone he used when he wanted control. Mom, you're not really going to let him talk to me like that, are you? She shook her head slightly. Please, both of you, stop. He smirked and grabbed his coat. You know what, forget it. If you want to side with your golden grandson, fine. But when you need help paying your bills next month, don't call me. He brushed past me and slammed the door so hard the picture frames rattled. The silence after that was suffocating. Grandma just sat there, staring at the floor. He's never spoken to me like that before, she whispered. I wanted to tell her he always had, just not where she could see it. The next few days, she didn't answer my calls. When I dropped by again, she wasn't home. The neighbors said Martin had picked her up for a few errands. That phrase made my stomach turn. By Sunday, she finally called back. Her voice was quiet, flat. Rick, don't be angry, please. I signed it. It took me a second to process. Signed what? The papers. The property transfer. Martin said it was for tax purposes. He promised I'd still keep everything, but her voice cracked. I don't think that's true anymore. My heart sank. Grandma, please tell me you didn't. I just wanted it to stop, she said, crying now. He wouldn't leave me alone. He said you were planning to sell the house. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a whisper. You trusted him. She sniffled. I know. I know. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the city lights. The sound of traffic below blurred into nothing. I'd spent years building something out of nothing. My company, the restaurant, a life I could be proud of. But all that success felt meaningless now. I couldn't protect the one person who'd always protected me. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Martin cut off her phone to save costs. He opened a joint account and started transferring her pension payments. He even had the nerve to post on Facebook about being a devoted son caring for his aging mother. The comments were full of praise. You're such a good man, Martin. Your mom's lucky to have you. Wish my kids were like you. Each one felt like a knife. I tried to intervene legally, but the paperwork was airtight. Martin had been preparing for months. Fake consultations, misleading clauses, and enough plausible deniability to make him look clean. I met with a lawyer who sighed after flipping through the documents. I hate to say it, he told me, but unless we can prove coercion or fraud, there's not much we can do. She signed willingly. Willingly. That word burned. I walked out of that office feeling like I'd failed her completely. The next time I saw Grandma, she wasn't at her house. She was in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Martin had downsized her living situation, calling it more manageable. It was clean, but soulless. No rose garden. No framed photos. Just a TV, a recliner, and a small kitchenette. When she opened the door, her eyes lit up. Oh, Rick, she said softly, hugging me. I didn't think you'd come. I'll always come, I said, forcing a smile. We sat down, and I asked gently, Are you happy here? She hesitated. It's quiet. That word, quiet, said everything. I stayed with her for a few hours, fixing the leaky faucet and replacing the light bulb she couldn't reach. When I left, she stood at the window, waving like she used to when I was little. Only now, There was something behind her smile, resignation. When I got home, I poured myself a drink and stared at the wall for a long time. I'd spent weeks trying to fight Martin with logic, decency, even legality. But that's not how people like him lose. They don't feel shame, or empathy, or consequence. Not until it hits their wallet or their ego. And that's when the shift happened. The anger that had been eating at me turned into focus. Cold, sharp, deliberate focus. I pulled out the restaurant's reservation book and stared at the dates circled for our next family dinner, the one Martin insisted on hosting to show there were no hard feelings. I almost laughed. No hard feelings. That was the moment I knew what I had to do. Not just to get back what he stole, but to make sure everyone finally saw him for what he truly was. I didn't tell anyone. Not Grandma, not my staff, not even Kevin. I just began setting things in motion quietly, methodically. Because if Martin wanted to play power games with signatures and paperwork, fine. But I was about to show him that the real power didn't come from paper. It came from truth. And when the next dinner arrived, truth would be served first, before the meal, before the wine, before the bill. The months that followed were strangely quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was that kind of silence that comes after a storm, when you know the next one's already forming on the horizon. After Grandma was moved into that sterile little apartment, Martin paraded around like a hero. He'd tell anyone who'd listen that he rescued her from an unsafe old house, that he'd stepped up when no one else would. He made himself the saint of family responsibility. And the worst part? People bought it. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years started texting me things like, "You should be proud of your brother for taking care of Mom," or "You should call him and make peace." Peace. That word had lost all meaning. But I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I went quiet, because I'd realized something that changed everything. People like Martin win in noise. They thrive in attention, in chaos, in emotional reactions. They manipulate perception. But what they don't notice is what's happening behind the scenes, when everyone's too busy listening to their version of the story. That's where I started to rebuild, silently, carefully. At first, it was small things. I'd visit Grandma on weekends, sometimes bringing groceries or flowers from her old garden, freshly cut from the house she no longer owned. She'd smile, but there was always a faint sadness in her eyes. Then one afternoon, as I was fixing the kitchen cabinet for her, she said something that made me pause. "You know, dear," she said, stirring her tea, "your grandfather used to say, 'Every liar forgets what they said, but truth remembers.'" I looked up from the tools. "He said that." She nodded. He was right, too. Martin keeps changing his story about why we moved. First it was the stairs, then the plumbing, then safety concerns. He's forgetting what he told me. That one sentence lit a spark. Because she was right, Martin couldn't keep a story straight if his life depended on it. And in business, that's where I thrived. Consistency, records, proof. So I started collecting. Every visit, every conversation, every document he sent her, I took photos. I made notes. I checked transaction histories. I even tracked down the notary who'd stamped the transfer documents. A friend in my network, an attorney who owed me a favor, looked them over quietly. And that's when I learned something that flipped the entire situation upside down. The signature on the property transfer was legitimate, yes, but the witness signature wasn't. The notary's assistant, who had allegedly confirmed the signing, didn't even work there on that date. The stamp was backdated. It was a small detail, almost invisible, but it meant one thing. Martin's airtight paperwork had a leak. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. But for the first time in months, I felt something shift. A sense of power returning, slow and steady, like a tide coming in. While I was gathering my quiet evidence, things at work took off too. My company, the marketing firm I'd built from nothing, landed a massive new client, a tech conglomerate expanding into Europe. The deal doubled our yearly revenue overnight. Suddenly, the local business journals wanted interviews. Reporters asked for quotes about young entrepreneurs transforming regional markets. It was surreal. I'd spent years grinding, working late nights while my family mocked me for chasing dreams, and now those dreams were paying dividends. But even with the success, I didn't brag. I didn't post about it, didn't tell the family. I stayed silent, planning. Until one day, I got an unexpected call. It was Sharon. "Rick," she said, her tone sugary sweet. "We were just talking about you. You're doing so well for yourself." We thought maybe you could help out with something small. I almost laughed. Define small. Well, she continued, Martin's been managing Mom's finances, and we're running into some tax issues because of the property transfer. You're good with business. Maybe you could, donate some of your company funds as a loan, just to help Mom out. There it was. The audacity. I kept my tone calm. So let me get this straight. You're asking me to loan money to fix a tax mess caused by you taking Grandma's house. That's a very negative way of putting it, she said quickly. It's just temporary. Martin's under a lot of stress. I'm sure he is, I said. You tell him I'll think about it. And I did think about it, but not the way she meant. I realized something crucial in that conversation. Martin wasn't untouchable anymore. He was scrambling. The smart son, who'd always strutted around acting like he had everything under control, was now running out of room to maneuver. But I wasn't going to swoop in guns blazing. I wanted this to unfold naturally, publicly, and without a single word from me that could be twisted later. So I went to work on something different, something bigger. I called Kevin, my restaurant partner. You remember how Martin and Sharon acted last time? I asked. He groaned. How could I forget? They sent back their wine twice and complained about the lighting. Good, I said. We're going to invite them back. He laughed, thinking I was joking. Invite them back? Are you insane? Not insane, I said. Strategic. I explained my plan, not all of it, just enough to get him on board. He agreed immediately. The timing couldn't have been better. The restaurant had just gone through a quiet rebrand under my company's umbrella. New logo, new name, new reservation system. It wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was officially listed as part of my firm's hospitality investments. Everything, down to the receipts, tied directly to my business identity. Meaning, every transaction, every bill, every record that went through the system was traceable and verifiable. So when I sent the invites for Grandma's appreciation dinner, under the company letterhead, it looked completely official, formal, generous, impossible to question. And, of course, Martin responded within an hour. Martin, glad to see you're finally doing something right. We'll be there. Make sure the wine's better this time. Perfect. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I was working with my lawyer to prepare a quiet complaint. With the evidence I'd gathered, the falsified witness, the backdated stamp, and proof of coercion, he believed we had enough to open an investigation into financial elder abuse. But I didn't want to file it yet. Not until I had one more thing, a public moment. Something that couldn't be brushed off as family drama. That's what the dinner was going to be. The turning point came a week before the dinner. Grandma called me unexpectedly. Her voice was stronger, clearer, like she'd been thinking about something for a while. Rick, she said, I've been keeping a journal. Everything that happened, every visit, every time he yelled or made me sign something. I think I want you to have it. I didn't speak for a moment. You're sure? I am. I don't know what you're planning, but I trust you. I can't fix what's been done, but maybe you can. I drove over that same night. She handed me a small, leather-bound notebook, worn at the edges but neatly organized. Inside were pages of notes in her tidy cursive, dates, quotes, even descriptions of documents she'd signed. It was evidence written straight from her memory, the kind no one could dismiss as manipulation. I hugged her before I left, and for the first time in a long time, she whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." That night, sitting at my desk with her journal open beside me, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the same way. The fury had cooled into something sharper, clarity. I wasn't going to ruin Martin out of vengeance. I was going to do it because he deserved to face the truth, and because Grandma deserved peace. When I walked into my office the next morning, my assistant greeted me with, "You've been all over the news." I blinked. What? She spun her laptop around. There it was, a feature on local entrepreneurs titled "The New Faces of Leadership: How One Man's Vision Changed Downtown Business." There was a photo of me standing outside the restaurant, smiling beside the sign. The article highlighted the company's growth, our community outreach, and even mentioned how the restaurant supported charity events for senior welfare. The irony made me smirk. For the first time in months, I felt in control again, not just financially, but morally. I had influence, credibility, and a growing network. Martin had manipulation. I had proof. By the time the next family dinner approached, everything was set. The tables were booked, the staff briefed, and the restaurant was quietly wired for transparency. receipts linked directly to my company's public record, cameras legally operating for security monitoring. And Grandma? She agreed to come. Are you sure you want to do this? I asked her gently. She smiled, that same soft but knowing smile. I think it's time they see who you've become. I nodded, because she wasn't just talking about the business or the money. She meant the quiet strength I'd been building, the calm before the storm that was finally ready to break. The night was approaching fast, and this time, I wasn't the family disappointment or the ATM. This time, I was the one holding every card. The night of the dinner arrived crisp and clear, the air heavy with that electric mix of nerves and certainty that always comes before something big. The restaurant lights glowed soft amber through the windows, reflecting on the sidewalk like liquid gold. Inside, every table was set perfectly, linen pressed, silver polished, the faint hum of jazz threading through the low murmur of guests. Grandma arrived first. I'd sent a car for her, and when she stepped through the doors, she looked radiant. Not in the way of someone dressed up, but in the quiet dignity of a woman who had weathered storms and still stood tall. "Oh, Rick," she said softly, looking around. "You didn't have to do all this." "I did," I told her, "because tonight's not about them. It's about you." She smiled faintly, but didn't ask questions. Maybe she knew this dinner was more than it seemed. At 7 o'clock sharp, the doors opened again. Martin strutted in first, wearing an expensive suit that didn't quite fit his frame. Sharon followed, dripping with gold jewelry. Mason and Kylie trailed behind, both scrolling on their phones like it was a chore to be there. Martin spread his arms like he owned the place. "Well, look who's trying to impress everyone again," he said, his grin smug. "All this just to make up for that disaster last time?" I smiled easily. "Something like that." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Hey, at least you're consistent. Overcompensating as usual." Grandma flinched slightly, but I just poured her a glass of water and said calmly, "Make yourselves comfortable." We sat, and the night began almost normally. The waiters served wine, top shelf, and appetizers rolled out one by one. Conversation buzzed, shallow and performative. Martin bragged about a new business opportunity. Sharon complained about rising property taxes, and Kylie kept sighing loudly, complaining the restaurant didn't even have live music. I stayed quiet, just watching, waiting. When the main course arrived, I caught the manager's eye. Kevin gave me a subtle nod from across the room. Everything was ready. "So," Martin said between bites of steak, "how's your little company doing, Rick? Still running those Instagram ads for coffee shops?" I looked up slowly. "It's going well. We're expanding into real estate, actually." He raised an eyebrow. "Real estate? You?" "Yeah," I said, sipping my wine. "We recently acquired a few properties downtown. Some restaurants, too." He laughed. "Restaurants? Guess you're desperate for attention, huh?" I leaned back in my chair. "Maybe. Or maybe I just like having control over the things people take for granted." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shrugged. "You'll see." Kevin appeared then, smiling politely. "Mr. Carson," he said, addressing me by my company name. Formal, professional. "Would you like me to bring the documents for tonight's sponsorship acknowledgement?" Martin's head turned sharply. "Sponsorship?" I nodded. "Oh, right. I forgot to mention. Tonight's dinner isn't just a family gathering. It's part of our company's community partnership program. We sponsor events for senior welfare foundations. Grandma's the honorary guest." Grandma blinked, confused but touched. "Oh, Rick, that's wonderful." Sharon smiled sweetly. "That's so kind of you," she said. "See, Martin? He's not always trying to one-up everyone." Martin chuckled under his breath. "We'll see." Kevin continued. "Before dessert, we'll make a brief announcement. It's standard, just acknowledgement for the press and donors." "The press?" Sharon's fork froze midair. "Wait, there's press here?" I smiled. "A few local journalists. Just community coverage. You'll barely notice them." Her eyes widened slightly. Martin shifted in his chair. "You really like making a show of yourself, don't you?" "Not really," I said. "I just like transparency." That word hung in the air a moment too long. We finished the meal, and as dessert arrived, Kevin dimmed the lights slightly. A small projector lit up the far wall, showing a looping slideshow, photos of Grandma through the years, her garden, her old house, her volunteer work. She smiled as the images played. But then, the slideshow changed. The next slide showed a scanned letter, a legal document. Grandma's name, bold at the top, and beneath it, property transfer, authorization of title. Martin froze. The next slide showed a close-up of the notary's stamp, the backdated one. Then, a witness signature labeled inactive employee. Sharon's hand shot to her mouth. "Rick, what is this?" The murmurs in the restaurant grew louder. Guests looked around, whispering. The journalists raised their phones, recording quietly. I stood slowly. "I didn't plan to show this tonight," I said evenly. "But since my company is all about integrity and community responsibility, I think people deserve to see how some folks treat their own family." Martin stood, face red. "You set us up." "No," I said. "You set yourself up when you forged documents to take Grandma's house. I just gave you a stage." He slammed his hand on the table. "You can't prove anything." "Actually," I said, motioning to Kevin. The projector changed again, this time to a scanned excerpt from Grandma's journal. Her handwriting, clear and unmistakable, describing how he'd pressured her, how she'd signed out of fear. Gasps rippled through the room. "Stop this," Sharon hissed, her voice trembling. "This is family business." I looked her dead in the eye. "No, this is criminal business." Martin's jaw clenched. "You think you're some kind of hero? You just embarrassed your entire family in public." I leaned forward, voice low but calm. "You embarrassed yourself. I just made sure no one forgets it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Grandma's eyes shimmered with tears, not of shame, but relief. For once, the truth was louder than the lies. Then Martin did what I knew he'd do. He lashed out. "You think you're better than me?" he shouted, pointing at me across the table. "You always needed attention, always needed to prove something. You're nothing but a fraud with money." I smiled. "Funny you should say that." I gestured toward the restaurant staff. "You know, the restaurant you're standing in, the one you mocked, is part of my company now. Every bill, every seat, every signature tonight goes through our system. So when you ordered your third bottle of imported wine, guess whose company's name was on the receipt?" His face paled. "That's right," I continued. "Mine. Which means when the tab comes, it's not just a dinner bill. It's a corporate invoice." He looked around, realizing too late that the servers were already handing out printed receipts, each one stamped with my company's logo and marked private event, executive function. Kevin cleared his throat professionally. "Per the terms of the event, each attendee will receive an itemized account of their consumption for tax reporting purposes." Sharon's voice cracked. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said calmly, "that everything you ordered tonight is charged at the private event rate, 20 times the base price. You're not family guests tonight. You're corporate guests of the host." Martin's mouth fell open. "You can't do this." I smiled faintly. I already did. The restaurant was dead silent except for the faint sound of paper being shuffled and wine glasses being set down. Grandma just sat there, watching quietly, her trembling hand covering her mouth. Kevin placed a final envelope on the table, a small, cream-colored one with Grandma's name in gold. "And for you, ma'am," he said gently. She opened it and gasped. Inside was a set of legal documents, reversal filings for the property transfer, notarized with fresh stamps, and her rightful ownership reinstated. I turned back to Martin. "You see, while you were posting about being the perfect son, I was rebuilding what you stole." The bank agreed to void the old documents pending investigation. "It's over." He stared at me, red-faced, words choking in his throat. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said softly, "but not as much as you will." The reporters had caught everything, the outburst, the projection, even his threats. And as Martin stood there, shaking with fury while Grandma clutched her reclaimed deed, I realized something. For years, he'd controlled the narrative, the loud, flashy version of the truth that painted him as the savior and me as the failure. But tonight, in one quiet, calculated move, I'd taken it all back. No shouting, no fights, just exposure. The waiter brought the final stack of receipts to the table. Martin's total was neatly highlighted in red ink. $12,470. He looked at it, then at me. "You're insane." I smiled faintly. "No, just thorough." And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the disappointment or the backup plan or the quiet one who stayed out of the way. I felt like the person Grandma had always believed I could be. Someone who stood up and made it count. The silence that followed was the kind you could feel in your bones. No one moved. No one spoke. Martin's hand hovered over the receipt, his knuckles white, his jaw tightening as he realized there was no saving face. Sharon looked around the room, desperate for sympathy, but every pair of eyes in the restaurant was fixed on them, watching, judging, recording. Kylie muttered under her breath, "Dad, just pay it and let's go," her voice trembling with embarrassment. Mason stared down at his phone, probably already reading the online posts that were starting to spread. Because, of course, people had been filming. And by the time the night ended, clips of the family meltdown at fine dining charity event would be all over social media. Martin turned toward me, his face flushed and his voice shaking with rage. "You think you've won? You think this makes you better than us?" I met his glare without flinching. "No, Martin, I didn't do this to be better. I did it so Grandma could hold her head up again without wondering if the people she loves are just waiting to take something else from her." He opened his mouth to speak, but couldn't find words. That was the moment it hit him. Not the money, not the humiliation, but the finality of it. His story was over. The mask was gone. "Let's go," Sharon hissed, tugging at his sleeve. "We'll deal with this later." But Martin didn't move. He just stood there, breathing hard, glaring at me like a man watching his empire crumble. Because, in a way, that's exactly what was happening. Everything he'd built on manipulation, guilt, and false pride had collapsed under one thing he couldn't control: truth. The reporters began quietly packing up. One of them, a woman from the local paper, approached Grandma with a gentle smile. "Ma'am, would you like to say a few words about your grandson's foundation and what this night meant to you?" Grandma looked at me, her eyes wet, then nodded. "Just one thing," she said softly into the microphone. "Family isn't who takes from you. It's who stands up for you when everyone else looks away." The room erupted in quiet applause, not loud or forced, but respectful, genuine. Martin stormed out first, shoving past the waiter who tried to hand him his coat. Sharon followed, whispering something harsh under her breath. Kylie trailed behind, eyes down, shame all over her face. Mason lingered a second longer, gave me a small, almost apologetic nod, and then left without a word. When the door shut behind them, the air seemed lighter, cleaner. Grandma reached across the table and took my hand. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You don't have to," I told her. "You already did, when you raised me to do what's right, even when it hurts." She smiled, that warm, tired smile that had always felt like home. "Your grandfather would be proud." We finished dessert in peace. For once, there was no tension, no performance, just the quiet joy of two people finally free of the weight others had put on them. Over the next few weeks, the fallout came fast. The bank completed its review and fully reinstated Grandma's ownership. The investigation into the fraudulent notary stamp escalated, and Martin was ordered to appear in court. Sharon tried to claim ignorance, but her name on the fund account tied her directly to the financial misconduct. Their perfect reputation disintegrated overnight. The same relatives who used to praise them now whispered about them in disbelief. And as for me, my company gained more recognition than ever. The viral clips from the dinner sparked headlines about family justice and corporate accountability. It wasn't what I intended, but it made people listen. Donations to our senior welfare initiative skyrocketed, and Grandma's story became part of something bigger, a movement that helped others protect their loved ones from the same kind of betrayal. Martin tried to call me once, maybe to threaten, maybe to beg, but I didn't answer. Some things don't deserve closure. Weeks later, Grandma moved back into her house. I had the place cleaned, repainted, and filled the garden with new rose bushes, each one blooming brighter than the last. She stood on the porch the day she returned, clutching the keys, and said, "Feels like I can breathe again." I smiled. "You can." That night, as I drove away, I passed Martin's SUV parked outside his rental apartment. Smaller, older, and far from the life he'd bragged about. He was sitting in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead, face pale under the streetlight. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered Grandma's face that night. The years of quiet endurance, the tears, the shaking hands. And that pity turned to something else. Peace. You can forgive people who make mistakes. But those who build their success on hurting others, they have to learn the hard way. A week later, the restaurant received a letter addressed to me, handwritten, shaky. It was from Grandma. "You didn't just save my home, dear. You reminded me that kindness isn't weakness, it's strength. I'm proud of you." And I hope someday you find someone who'll stand for you the way you stood for me. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Because the truth is, revenge isn't about payback. It's about balance. About restoring what was stolen, dignity, trust, peace. And that night, in one small restaurant filled with too many ghosts, we finally got it back. As for Martin, the last I heard, he'd lost his consulting job after the investigation made the news. Sharon moved back in with her sister. Mason left town. Kylie deleted her social media after weeks of being roasted online. Funny how fast everything they built on lies vanished once the truth came out. But Grandma's roses? They're still blooming. And sometimes, when I stop by and see her smiling on that porch, the same porch she almost lost, I think about that night and the words she whispered before I left. Not all storms come to destroy, Rick. Some come to clear the air. And she was right. Because after everything, the humiliation, the betrayal, the silence, and the fight, the air finally felt clear. And for the first time in years, so did I.